Hey, it's Jer Stays. Today's episode of Your Daily Detroit is about something you may not have thought about very often. When a big storm hits, where exactly does all of the wastewater in our region go? And how do we handle it? It gets attention in the news when basements back up or a freeway is brought to a standstill, but in order to fix it, it requires a plan. And that's just what the Great Lakes Water Authority has announced, a new 40-year plan to help deal with the realities of what's happening in our region. It has a focus on fixing and improving what we have, and there's been a good dose of regional cooperation, which is frankly a bit of news for Southeast Michigan. Joining me to talk about it is Suzanne Coffey. She's the Chief Planning Officer of the GLWA. Then I'll share 3 things to know around town as StockX raises even more money, local restaurants are getting slapped with liquor license suspensions, and a longtime Eastern Market business is expanding. This is Your Daily Detroit for Wednesday, December 16th, 2020. Thanks to our members like Nikki and David for supporting what we do at patreon.com/dailydetroit. Helps make sure that this podcast happens each and every weekday. We think smart coverage about our region should be available to everyone, but we need your support to make that happen. So join us, patreon.com/dailydetroit. All right, let's get started with the GLWA's Suzanne Coffey. So Suzanne, I want to start off with how important it was to get all of these stakeholders at the table. You're talking about 100 of those, 79 or so municipalities that you're serving. That's a lot of people to get behind one plan.
We serve 79 different communities, right? We really serve 2.8 million people on the sewer side. We've got water and sewer. We do drinking water. On the drinking water side, we're closer to 4 million. So a lot of people, right? A lot of communities. The 100 stakeholders, those are people that participated in the master plan process. Probably not all 79 communities were represented, but a lot were represented. And yeah, it was a big effort. And bringing it together, it took a lot of effort and time. You know, collaboration is part of what we're founded on at GLWA. You know, we're getting close to our 5-year anniversary operating. And it was one of the main pillars. And for us, you know, collaboration, you know, more than just a word, right? It takes a lot of action to do that, a lot of meetings, a lot of listening, getting people together, getting them to the table. You know, and when you do that, you really find out, I think, with some time that we have a lot more in common than we have that are differences, right? It was a good effort. Absolutely. It was certainly a big effort, and it really did turn out well.
Regional cooperation is something that the Detroit region sometimes isn't known for. What was different about the process that was able to get you guys over the line?
So I think a couple of things. Number one, having just stood up the Great Lakes Water Authority in right about the time that we stood up operationally, where the region had come together to form Great Lakes Water Authority, we kicked this off right on the heels of that. And so everyone had a great success in forming the authority. We were all very engaged. And it was easy then to step into, okay, we have this first big initiative that we're going to do to bring people together. Continue to come to the table, right? Everyone came to the table to form the authority. Come to the table because this is going to plot the course of the next 40 years in the wastewater system. And everyone's concerned about water and sewer bills, right? I mean, everybody wants lower bills. So if you really want that and it's important to you, then assign some people to come down to our meetings. And on the heels of that great success of standing up the authority, I think that's what really helped us to get off to a great start with this.
So beyond lower water bills, what are kind of the goals of doing all this?
So biggest goal that we have on the wastewater side in this plan is improving water quality. And when I say that, I mean in our lakes and rivers and streams. At its core, it's water quality. How are we going to do it? If we take a look at the system functioning as a whole, it gives us opportunities we wouldn't have otherwise. So most of the people that engage in the master plan work for a municipality or a county government or something like that. And certainly they have an obligation to represent that local unit of government. What we did is we said, okay, we understand that, right? You all have a job to do, but let's take a few minutes and loosen up our minds and talk a little bit about what it would look like if we didn't have the municipal boundaries, right? This system functions as a whole. The water doesn't know it leaves one community and goes into another, right? So let's do that. Let's spend time doing that. And oh, by the way, maybe some ideas will come up. And so that's how we work through it. We all have affordability in mind because that's always top of mind. But we said, you know, how can we improve water quality the fastest and the cheapest way if we function as a region? And once we have ideas, then you can go back and say, okay, how does that affect my individual community? Is there an issue? And so that's really the approach that we took. That's how we got people to really engage in regional thinking.
Well, and that's a theme that I've heard before. We've had Candace Miller on the show a couple times from Macomb County, and she said a lot of the same things, not to this particular plan, but in the past when we were talking about issues, say with that Madison Heights issue that happened with that one automotive supplier that went defunct, and there was the ooze on the freeway. Like, although that wasn't in Macomb County, that was right next door, and everything ties together. So then I look at it and go, how is this working together going to impact the environment with the knowledge that, frankly, no matter where you are in the region, all of the wastewater and things like that, it kind of affects all of us because it touches our Great Lakes.
That's right. So that's a good point. Like, we all want to have recreation here in Michigan in the water. We're centralized around the water. 20% of the world's fresh water is here, right? We have to be good stewards, and we want to be able to have that recreation. It doesn't matter if that river is in our community, because we might drive a little ways to go kayaking or canoeing in a river, or go to a park, or want to go to the beach, or whatever it might be. So the reality is we have to be good stewards of it, because it does travel. It travels, and it's really a part of our culture here in Michigan, right? It's something that we really want to be responsible for, and responsible stewards of it. So, yeah, there's no doubt it is all connected. And that idea of thinking that way gave us, lots of good ideas. One of the big elements of the master plan is regional operations in real time. All the sewer systems function and have some automation to them, but during rain events, they all have some manual intervention that happens. And what we know is when it comes and it rains in the area, it typically doesn't rain spatially the same over everywhere. So if there's a big rain event happening up in Macomb County, they may have a need to have more flows come down to the regional system. Well, it might not be raining over in Wayne County. It might not be raining in Detroit the way that it's raining up in Macomb. So when the operators can talk real time, they can say, hey, we can pull back flow over here to let you discharge more flow over here and into the system, and get it all to the water resource recovery facility down in Detroit, or one of our wet weather treatment facilities. So that's another big benefit. When we came together and we began to really function as a region, it gave way for us to actually have real-time communications and operations, which is definitely a benefit, definitely optimizing the system when we can, just call someone up because you were meeting with him last month, you know him, you can call him up and say, hey, can you hold that flow? Those things are really happening.
Well, and one thing that's a little bit different, I think, than some areas in the nation, I don't know all of the details, but our land area that's served by GLWA is pretty darn large. I mean, I think we're talking about a lot of land. I think people think about their own community. Maybe they live in Warren, or maybe they live in Canton, or they live in the city of Detroit, and they know it as like the Detroit system or whatever their preconceived notion is. Can you kind of lay out like the land area here we're talking for GLWA?
So we serve 944 square miles.
Ooh.
So that is a tremendously large area. So we are one of the largest treatment facilities in North America. And we have a tremendously large population we serve. We told you 2.8 million people, large parts of Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb counties. And if you put all the pipes together, 15,000 miles of pipes, and that's our pipes and our customers' pipes, right? So that big pipe network functions as one system. It is enormous, right? It's a big responsibility on this large freshwater body, and there's no doubt it is unlike any other in the region. There's no doubt about it, or even, like I said, one of the top 10 in the country. It's a big facility.
Well, one of the things listeners will want to know about is shovels in the ground projects, right? Because people look at things, they want to know, are there going to be trucks out there? Are there going to be improvements? What kinds of projects, what kinds of initiatives is this going to include?
So the first thing we're going to do is optimize what we have. So we've got a couple projects where we're going to expand some of the tributary area of our current facilities. When we sat down to take a look at what our priorities are, we have to keep operating what we have well. The second step is, okay, can we maximize it? Can we optimize it? Could we bring more flow in? Before we build another facility, before we build another big operational facility, let's maximize what we've got. So we've got some projects like that in a couple places where we're going to do some things like connector sewers, build a new sewer that connects kind of this pipe to that pipe. We've got some of that going on and planned in design phase over on the west side of Detroit. We have a project where we're going to be expanding what we call regulators, and they're really basically a connector pipe that goes from a smaller pipe to a larger pipe down along Jefferson. years and years ago, it was okay for excess water to just go into the rivers, right? That was what was acceptable by society, certainly not acceptable today. But our system's, over 150 years old. I think it's 180 years old or something like that. So a lot of these things that were put in, we rethought them and said, hey, what can we do with those today differently? What can we do? So we do have a project that we're working on where we're going to expand basically the connector between the local sewers and the larger sewers to make sure that we're getting as much flow as possible in our large diameter pipes. And that will limit the amount that overflows during a rain event. Those are some of the examples of the projects that we're working on. We're trying really hard not to build any new big facilities, rather optimize and do this smart operations to minimize any big new capital or big new facilities, because those cost a lot of money. And they don't just cost a lot of money to build. They cost a lot of money to maintain over the years. 10 years, 20 years later, we're starting to do a big replacement. In the cost avoidance affordability line of things, we're trying not to build a lot of new things. One of the other things that we're doing, I think that's really exciting that we haven't touched on yet, is we're partnering with MDOT. And MDOT's got a lot of big freeway projects. So you talk about shovels in the ground. If you drive around anywhere around here, you see we have a ton of freeway projects going on. And us collaborating and working in this regional way with MDOT is something that we haven't done before and hasn't been done historically, right? We're kind of different utilities doing different things. Well, the reality is all that rainwater that hits the pavement, if that's going to make its way to our sewers, that's going to affect us, right? So we still have combined sewers in lots of areas, not just in the city of Detroit, but a big portion of our system has combined sewers. When we're doing roadway projects or when MDOT's doing roadway projects, that's an opportunity for us to say, hey, can we get some of that water out of the system? Maybe historically it came into the system. Now can we get it out of the system going directly to the rivers? We have a big initiative with the Gordie Howe Bridge project to get that water out, right, going directly to the Detroit River instead of coming into the sewer. So that's another place, even though they're not our shovels, you ask about shovels, it's MDOT's work, and also we're coordinating with them on the I-94 improvement project as well to make sure that we're doing what we can to be good stewards of that dollar. The road dollars are limited, the water and wastewater dollars are limited. So let's work together and make sure that we're, getting the benefit that we can when we collaborate in the planning stage. And those big projects on the roads and the highways, they're in planning 5-10 years before they get built. So you got to have those relationships built. So that's another big piece of what we're doing with this master plan project.
Yeah, I think a lot of listeners will remember that the freeways at times have gotten kind of overburdened with water. There's been some pretty visually stunning things. I grew up on the east side, so I know about the kind of mess that Jefferson's been over the years, with having to pull up pipes, all kinds of issues of that infrastructure. There seems to be a calibration as to kind of the reality of things, because to me, at least covering this region for the last few years, one of the things I've noticed is that we haven't significantly increased population over the last, number of decades as a region, but we've continued to sprawl out farther and farther as far as land area. How has that impacted some of the work you're doing? And does that tie into what you're talking about as far as connectors and trying to use the facilities that we have now instead of having to build more and more?
It does all impact it, right? Where are the flows coming from? So when we did this initiative this last 5 years, as we went through this process, we recalibrated our models because we need to know where those flows are coming in. And we talked to our customers and said, hey, can you give us your models? So these are computer models that simulate the flows, right? They put simulated rain over. We have that simulated flow coming into the sewer system. So we recalibrate it. And that's what you got to do every few years. You got to recalibrate. You got to make sure that you have a good, accurate representation. In this information age that we're in, where everything's smart, that's one of the best things about it. We have these ideas of these digital twins that are coming along where operators can actually run scenarios. But if you don't know where that population is, right, and you don't know where the flows are coming from, you can't accurately predict what's going to happen. So the master plan did update that, and that was a really good, what we call analytical tool that we were able to give to MDOT and say, okay, you use this when you start simulating things, and the customers as well, so that we know where that's coming from. There's a lot of focus on wet weather. The other thing that's coming with that, you talked about that change in population, but also the change in the weather patterns. These types of analytical tools are really nimble and allow us to be able to do lots of predictions and hundreds and thousands of simulations so that we can do the best job at operating that we can.
What are the weather patterns you're kind of seeing?
So we do see more intense rain. We have seen that. We have updated what we call the hydrographs that come into our system. So more intense, shorter bursts of rain. We watch for that. This is where the regional operating plan is what we call it. This real-time operations can really make a difference. So if you've got a short, intense burst over on the east side of Detroit, for example, we can take a look. We can look at these sensors in the system, more smart technology, and say, okay, where are the sewer levels? Can we open this gate? Can we close that gate? Can we push this flow around to make sure that as much of it gets down to treatment as it can, and that we protect basements? You know, Mother Nature can always throw us a bigger event. People wonder sometimes why it is that we can't just eliminate overflows entirely. And the reality is you got to pick a design event. You got to pick something to design to, because the money's not unlimited, right? We can't just build pipes that are so big that they could take any rain event that could ever come. But that's where the smart operations really comes into play. When we see these higher intensity rain events, because we have more eyes on the system, we kind of call it turning the lights on in the system. So all of a sudden our operators have these nice computer dashboards and they can see where the levels are going and turn on this pump or turn off that type of thing. So that's how we're addressing this kind of changing climate.
Well, now that this is all put together, what is it that the public can kind of expect next? Are there parts that they're going to see right away, or parts for them to, get involved, those kind of things?
We have a Watershed Hub work group that spun off out of the master plan. It was one of the major recommendations. And what that is the watershed groups and people who are dealing with stormwater. We're coming together. We're bringing them together. We have this great collaborative foundation that we've built in terms of all coming together as a team and working over the last few years on this plan. We've expanded that thinking to stormwater. Largely, the public just doesn't see these services, right? They just rely on the fact that the services happen. They happen in a reliable way, right? When they use water, they return water to us. They don't want to have to think about it. So they're not going to see a lot right at their home types of things happening, but the waterways should be monitored more closely, more public attention on the waterways, where we're bringing the wastewater components and stormwater components together to talk about how they impact one another. So largely for us, in terms of that expansion for the public, more collaboration between watershed groups, surface water, like Friends of the Rouge, or these types of communities, associations that work on the water, tied to GLWA, right? That's the biggest, I think, public piece. And you're going to see construction projects, but as you heard me say, we really do want to limit those construction projects. That's what we're trying to do, not to build new facilities as much as to improve and optimize what we've got.
Well, and that makes a lot of sense. To me, I guess it brings the analogy of sports. If you have a game that is well officiated and keeping the game moving, you don't really notice the officials are there, right? And like if things are working really well, maybe it's something that, you don't notice it as well, but it's something that you should really appreciate, that there's a lot of work being put into to make all this go smoothly.
Yeah, I'll tell you, for years and years, I worked in the water utility business for quite a while. And for the longest time, us as a group, we just wanted the public not to even know about us, because that meant we were doing our job well and there weren't issues. What we've come to realize more recently is that we need to have outreach like this, because we can't just talk about increasing a charge because we've got to, upgrade our system or we've got to maintain our system. We can't come once a year and talk about wanting to raise the bill at the homeowner's perspective, and they don't even know what we do. So we've been trying hard, I would say, in the last 5 to 10 years to be a little more public with what we do. But you're exactly right that we work behind the scenes, and hopefully you don't ever have to call us for anything because you don't have an emergency or an issue. But we also want you to understand all the good things we're doing, that the region is coming together to solve problems. The public would expect us to do that, right, as good stewards of what we're doing. Of course, we need to be talking. Of course, we need to be doing those types of things. So, from my perspective, I like to be unseen, but I also appreciate the fact that people like you want to know what we're doing, because it gives me a chance to tell all the good things that are going on.
Well, if there's anything I can say about my audience is that we're pretty much the nerdiest people in Metro Detroit. And so we love this kind of stuff. And, this is the joy of this job, is to be able to highlight these things. I used to work in television news and in broadcast, and something like this, I would be lucky if I got a minute and a half, and we've been talking for about 20 minutes. And so if you want to get nerdy about all this stuff, this is the place to do it. So Suzanne Coffey, I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely welcome to my time. I appreciate the fact that you're interested. And certainly that nerdy component, as an engineer myself and a whole bunch of us analytical people, we love having an audience that's interested in what we do. So thank you.
Here's what else you should know today. Detroit-based StockX has raised another $275 million as part of a Series E funding round. That puts a Detroit-based company with more than 1,000 employees at a valuation of $2.8 billion. The company says the money will be used to fuel expansion globally, work on the product, and to get into more e-commerce categories. They've now raised nearly $500 million in investment. StockX also says they've achieved the break-even point this quarter, an accomplishment for a venture-funded company before its IPO. If you don't know what StockX is, it's basically a stock market of things, allowing people to buy and sell shoes and other items on an exchange. They say they get more than 25 million visitors a month to their website. The new round is claimed to be the largest in Michigan history and led by Tiger Global Management, along with Altimeter Capital, Sands Capital, and Whale Rock. Next, since the beginning of the pandemic, the Michigan Liquor Control Commission or other state entities have been shutting down businesses or suspending their liquor licenses for violations of rules around masking and gathering size set because of the coronavirus pandemic. Those incidents up until now have rarely happened in Metro Detroit, but 2 suspensions locally were announced Tuesday night. Polsky's Pub and Grub in Clinton Township was shut down for offering indoor bar service, discovered after investigators ordered beer at the bar. The owner allegedly admitted that he wasn't supposed to be serving, but said he had a family to feed. Of interest to many, Andiamo Italia's flagship location on 14 Mile in Warren got hit as well. MLCC investigators report that they had a wedding party of more than 60 people indoors on December 4th, with few wearing masks and food and drink service available. The timing on this one is notable. The owner of Andiamo's, Joe Vicari, had been leading the charge against pandemic restrictions. But just the day before the alleged violation, December 3rd, Vicari told a live stream event audience of around 300 restaurant owners that he doesn't want to disobey government orders and that it's, quote, a losing situation. Administrative law judge hearings will occur on Friday to determine any additional penalties. And finally, before I let you go, the Michigan Department of Transportation has awarded a grant to help fund improvements connected to E.W. Grabell & Sons' new $25 million production facility project in Detroit's Eastern Market. The city will spend about $1.5 million and the state will put up about $300,000 to fund road improvements around the new planned production facility on St. Aubin Street between Illinois and Superior. St. Aubin will be resurfaced to handle the additional traffic load. Illinois and Superior streets have been neglected for decades and will need to be completely rebuilt. E.W. Grabell & Sons has been in operation since 1883, and the hope is the project will attract more food processors and distributors to Detroit. This all comes as Eastern Market is changing, where areas like Russell Street, which you might know from the Saturday markets, are turning into more residential and commercial spaces, and producers are moving to adjacent, now vacant land to modernize their facilities. Multiple sources have told me recently that without more room, a number of Eastern Market industrial tenants were looking at moving to the suburbs so they could handle their additional business. So it's interesting to see Detroit hold on to these companies. Well, that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening to Your Daily Detroit. If you have feedback, ideas for the show, all those things, we have a voicemail, 313-789-3211, or you can email me, jer@dailydetroit.com. Thanks to Cheyenne Noserini, who worked behind the scenes to edit this episode, as well as everyone else who supports us at patreon.com/dailydetroit. I'm Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and I'll see you around Detroit. Talk tomorrow.